the crock pots were really supposed to be like a family cooking fair. Like we all come together with our different ideas and someone presents something that they're in the middle of doing, and hopefully we can like make it better while there's still time to make it better. And over the years, it has become more and more sort of formal and structured, and people present their thing and people ask questions at the end, and it's kind of like a little conference presentation without the other people presenting at the conference. And so I'm bringing us back to basics, which is like a long way of saying, don't expect this to be a finished idea. I'm really hoping this to be more of a workshop than a presentation. This all began for me literally last month when I emailed Austin Choi Fitzpatrick. It was like, what if we did this? And he was like, that's an awesome idea. We should totally do that. And then someone 2 weeks ago, I guess, Daria, said that they couldn't come to this crockpot presentation, give this presentation today. And Daria said, would you guys be willing to go? And Austin was like, yeah, sure, obviously we would be willing to go. I was like, okay. And then he was like, oh yeah, but then I have to be in DC. So here I am. So the idea is basically like the whole idea stems from this question. It's like, what if the Tijuana River could speak? What if we could create some form of sentience or personhood? And what kind of collection action problems might that be able to solve? So here we go. Why is it a problem? Well, it's a problem for a lot of different reasons. One of them is transboundary water pollution, where I think that we are increasingly aware of the many pollutants that are released into the Tijuana River. It's not only waterborne pollutants, but oftentimes they're aerosolized. There's an increasing problem with hydrogen sulfide in the air, which causes people not to be able to go outside, to have burning eyes, to experience vomiting. But the water pollution is really the big one. Beach closures have become like more regular than not in certain communities. Over the past, say, 3 years or so, I think Imperial Beach has been closed like nearly 900 days over the past 3 years. It's you basically cannot go to the beach, right? There have been lots of algal blooms, which in turn deplete the oxygen content of the water and cause large fish die-offs. They also have been increasingly getting large marine mammals sick as well. So we've been seeing a number of these toxic algae getting sea lions sick and dolphins as well, which are even harder to care for when they get sick. It's harder to recognize that they're sick as well. It also happens to be a river that is transboundary in nature, right? There are two major tributaries to the Tijuana River. There's the Alomar, and then there's the Arroyo de las Palmas, I think. You might know this better than myself, Tori. Anyway, but the Alomar is fed primarily through sources north of the border. Las Palmas is entirely south of the border. They then join, they come more north of the border again, then south of the border again, then they are channelized through, running through Tijuana itself, then they come north of the border again, and go through the sort of estuary zone and out into the Pacific. And so you can sort of see here the plume of wastewater, an effluent that sort of then gets swept up north due to the due to the currents over time. And so this is one of the interesting things for me is, yes, it's like primarily impacting and immediately impacting sort of more, poorer communities closer to the border. But more and more, it's like also impacting people who have like, multi-million-dollar homes in Coronado who also can't go to the beach. And I'm not saying like we should all pity them, but I think that it's conceivable that there's like interest and maybe money in trying to address this issue in creative ways. The US-Mexico border, as we all know, is like also deeply affected by asylum seekers, less so now for lots of reasons, well, not lots of reasons, but anyway. But this is also there are climate refugees who in recent years have been coming north from Central America. There's increasing xenophobia, actually like on both sides of the border, right? Rising Mexican nationalism as well, but also sort of US, sometimes white nationalism here. Climate change and environmental hazards. With climate change, sea levels are rising, and we are coming to an increased appreciation of just how important the like living shorelines are in absorbing storm surges and in cleaning water. We're seeing river shrinkage in many parts of the temperate world. There's also this sort of interesting sort of transboundary cultural connection for the Kumeyaay people who have traditionally been both north and south of the border. Their traditional homeland includes the entire rivershed of the Tijuana River. It also extends much farther than that, but it definitely also includes it. And that people have been essentially bifurcated by the imposition of the border. I also wanted to, I thought that the idea of giving a sort of AI-based sentience to a river would be interesting from the point of view of the Kroc IPJ, because the IPJ has been, seen as, there's obviously like the Rebecca is here, and she leads the cross-border initiative. I think, and Tori is also a sort of, like bilingual border type person, and I feel like we have like a lot of capacity in this area. We also are at a university that really seeks to be an anchor institution and seeks to create connections to local community-based organizations and cultural communities. And I think that doing so could like bring people together who might not otherwise come together around a single table. We've wanted to be, we've wanted to get into environmental peace building for a long time, and we are like sort of slowly building that capacity to do so, but we still only have, say, one course in environmental peace and justice, and IPJ programming doesn't currently have like much in this way, like it has been sort of tangentially over time. And then there's this sort of like, from my point of view, this potential for impact and maybe portability. If we were to create something cool and replicable here, like what other sorts of environmental features could be animated and personified and start to advocate for themselves, right, around the world. So brief timeline. There are a couple things that I want to go over. One is rights of the earth, and one is this idea of like a cybernetic earth. So the rights of the earth timeline goes back at least to 1972. This guy, Christopher Stone, wrote a now famous piece called "Should Trees Have Standing?" This was in response to the Walt Disney Corporation, which wanted to build this Disney's Mineral King ski resort in the Mineral King Valley of the Sierra Madre. And there was a huge uproar over it. Sierra Club sued, but then was found not to have standing because they didn't own the land. So how could they, how could they sue? They weren't being wronged in the first place. Mm-hmm. So this guy wrote this, the little guy, a lawyer, wrote the piece, should please have standing. And if they do have standing, then couldn't the Sierra Club then intervene on their behalf? And in fact, then Justice William Douglas, in his dissent of this piece of the suit, he actually cites this and says, he believes that natural objects could be allowed to appear in court through guardians who are advocating on their behalf. The Endangered Species Act, here, this does not, in any way create a legal personhood, but it does sort of mark this pivotal moment in at least US legal history where this sort of, this intrinsic value of natural resources is acknowledged. And this goes, this idea of like intrinsic versus utilitarian value of natural resources goes like way back to like, Gifford Pinchot and John Muir and a whole bunch of other folks from like the 19th century, but kind of exceeds the scope of this. So further milestones in this in rights of the earth. In 2008, this is like way before animal rights or rights of nature folks had really even like we like to think of ourselves in academia as being like boundary push or like envelope pushing, but actually like the Ecuadorian constitution was way ahead of like anybody thinking about this. And it had been started really as a Quechua conversation that was then brought and like over a period of a few years, like reified as the new constitution. Articles 71 through 74 of which talk about these enforceable rights of nature, and those rights of nature, I think 71 was the right to exist, 72 was the right to be free from harm, 73 is maybe the right to be restored and regenerate if you have been harmed. Anyway, like, so this is the first time that that nature is endowed with rights. Bolivia follows suit with its law of Mother Earth in 2009. And then in 2010, there's this famous article called "Giving Voice to Rivers" that is penned by a Maori legal theorist in New Zealand, and she comes to believe that that what has been going on in Latin America is really like resonates deeply with her sense of Maori identity and religion. And eventually, like these two persons are recognized in New Zealand. First, a forest, the Te Urewera forest, and then the Wanganui River. And the Wanganui River is like maybe the more famous one now because it has, appeared in court to defend itself from developers' claims. There's also then Colombia has recognized the Chato River, and again here, this is very much linked to Indigenous stewardship. And this is like an ongoing conversation that I would love for us to be thinking about, is like how central does the Indigenous voice need to be in any of these conversations? It's like clearly all of this comes out of Indigenous thinking around rivers, and in fact, the Wanganui River is recognized by the Wanganui Iwi people as being the ancestor of their tribe. And let's see, India tried to do this, but then the Supreme Court later stayed that action. If you know anything about the Indian Supreme Court, that should come as like zero surprise at all. In Quebec, the Magpie River has been granted legal personhood. And then strangely, in Florida in 2022, I don't know if you all were like paying attention to this, but in Orange County, Florida, this rights of nature charter was adopted. It was used to personify a river that then prevented a developer from developing some area along the river into, you know, whatever Florida has become. But you know, this all happened under DeSantis, and that was completely vacated. So philosophical contributions. I mean, we don't really necessarily have to go over all of this. I would like point out that like all of the philosophical contributions really for like rights of the earth have come after the action, which is really cool, right? It's come after this like indigenous based action around the world, and everybody's trying to like come to grips with what. Although like Bruno Latour's, he did have this politics of nature in 2004. Eduardo Galeano, nature is not mute, and this was specifically reacting to the law earlier passed in Ecuador. If any of you have like been in one of my classes, I probably tried to like make you read Donna Haraway at some point, who's just like so weird and awesome. But she sort of coins this term symbiosis. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, we'll try it again. Which is basically like a making with natural subjects and humans, sort of becoming these, you know, kin of the Cthulhu scene is what she called it, right? Alexander Flynn's Parks as Persons. This is actually like a critical thing that I'd really like for us all to engage with as well, who basically says like, yes, we can imbue parks, she's talking about national parks here, as persons, and associate them perhaps with indigenous stewardship. When we do that, oftentimes we are now sort of, we are perpetuating certain types of Western colonial property rights assumptions. So if you say this park is a person and that this park can now is associated with a legal entity, some sort of corporation, and that corporation is able to purchase land for itself and own it as private property, is this somehow buying into the whole system that stripped this land from that strips the intrinsic value from land in the first place, right? So there's the Moth Collective, the More Than Human Rights Collective, that is again headquartered in Ecuador, and then this book that has taken over like all of our lives, and Amazon and everything. It's like by far the most popular book in the environmental world, Is a River Alive, which, if you've read it, is beautiful and sometimes a little bit mawkish in places. He's a little bit overly emotional. Seems like maybe this rhetorical question, like, I'm not sure like why it had to be a rhetorical question. Anyway, but it's a beautiful book, and has gotten a lot of people thinking about this question. So then there's this whole thing about cybernetic planets. Can we think of the whole biosphere as being alive, and like what part does technology play in creating a kind of emergent nervous system, a neural network for the planet? This goes way, way back. There was like a bunch of weird people who were thinking about this in the 20s and 30s that I don't even like mention here, but one of the first persons is Vernadsky, who discusses the biosphere. It's not even translated into English until 1998. This is like how marginal this is. We have Thilao de Chardin and the Phenomena of Man. This is introducing this topic of like this idea of the new sphere, or this like collective consciousness. A little bit Manichaean, a little bit hard to understand what he's talking about. Buckminster Fuller, Gregory Bateson is like one of my personal heroes. I just love this guy. And Steps to an Ecology of Mind is one of them. Another is Mind and Nature, a Necessary Unity, which talks about these sort of the types of information processing circuits that we complete with our natural environment. That like not all thinking is done within the cranial compartment. It's done by interacting with our environment. I know that Abraham, you have to go. Sorry. No. But go. He's already given like 2 talks today. He's going to give another one. And then, very famously, James Lovelock comes out with the Gaia hypothesis that basically says all of the world can be thought of as one giant superorganism with interconnected systems that essentially like perform negative feedback loops that look a lot like homeostasis in an organism. Okay, go on. Maybe I'm going to skip over a lot of this stuff. But more recently, we get some folks who are looking at how sensors and networks can start to look, can start to give us a sense of the Earth as a kind of a program. Like if Gaia is a superorganism, can we like place some electrodes on this organism and figure out how it's operating? Can we do an MRI? Can we like an EKG, whatever? Benjamin Bratton basically is talking about this sort of accidental superstructure, informational superstructure, information processing superstructure that we are creating through this sort of formation of the technosphere. I stepped on a Haraway in here because I feel like she belongs everywhere. And then Bruce Clark talking about the Gaia theory and how it might connect to cybernetics. Then I had to put my own book on here because I spent like so long. I'm not sure other people would put this on the cybernetic planet timeline, but like I definitely have to like everything that's leading up to my book. Which is tries to sort of go beyond the Gaia hypothesis and say like if the Gaia hypothesis is formulating an idea of the planet as a superorganism, then what is coordinating all of these ecological functions? What is coordinating the search for resources or energy sources? What is coordinating the navigation of this superorganism and its environment, defending it from possible threats, et cetera, et cetera. So it sort of argues that the emergent AI infrastructure that we're starting to see is eventually going to grow into something that is not controllable by humans and does coordinate the Earth as a whole. Okay, so like a bunch of weird stuff. Go back to this. Here, if Robert McFarlane was asking, is the river alive? I want to sort of, and Austin, who would be here if he didn't have more important things to do, would be asking you as well, is what if we sort of made a double personhood for a river, rather than just, say, a legal personhood that exists in the in some sort of institutional framework. And honestly, let's be real, that's probably not going to happen this point in time under this political dispensation. But if we can like layer that with a different type of personhood, right? Like a personhood that is based on a claim of sentience or a claim to consciousness, what would that look like? This is the map of the Tijuana. Here are the 2 tributaries to the Alomar, and the Alomar sort of dips below here, and then here is the Arroyo de las Palmas, and then they meet sort of southeast of Tijuana and go above the and then flow through Tijuana and then flow north again. Okay. If we're going to do this, if we're going to think about embodying a river, like having AI embody a river, like what would you need? So one, you need models of the environment, right? You need something that is capable of of navigating an environment and improving on random trial and error, right? Random trial and error is just what happens in the complete absence of any form of intentionality or planning. So Gregory Bateson would say, right, you need a model of the environment. You then also need a model of those models. You need the ability to learn, right? Everything learns basically. Like a dog learns, like you could even argue in some sense, like plants learn, fungi learn. But if you have a model, your models, then this is what Gregory Bateson called learning two, when we can put our models, when we can sort of say, this is the model of how I am navigating my world. I'm going to put that on the table, and I'm going to look at that and critique that and change the way that I'm learning. And this is yet another sort of condition for consciousness in Bateson's world. And then embodiment, that like we need to be able to complete the circuit between us and the environment. And so those right now, almost no LLMs that are currently in existence are linked to an environment, right? They might be trained on the vast corpus of curated human knowledge that we, have generated, but in no real-time way is it embodied, getting real-time stimulus from a world that it can interact with. And so this is the last thing. And here, I will say that one of the interesting things is that the Tijuana Estuary Foundation actually already has deployed a pretty vast array of sensors, at least on this little part of the river, as it starts to rewild the estuary and make of it a place that is able to process more of the pollution that's coming downstream. What if we were then able to like push that sort of sensor network upstream? Wouldn't that be cool? And connect it to an LLM. Okay. Root biography. I'm going to try to like go faster here. The river is really, really old. I mean, some rivers are not old. Some rivers, like if you go to, Britain, most rivers there are not going to be older than, say, like 12,000 years because it was covered by a vast ice sheet until then, right? But here, this river is quite old. It probably emerged over the period of the Oligocene. So here's like, this is apparently, according to the Museum of Natural History, or Natural History Museum of San Diego, this is basically sort of what this region looked like during the Eocene. It's very warm, very like wet, and there are no there are very few. The ice caps are like minuscule at the time. The ocean levels are really high, and so none of the area or much of the area that we're talking about didn't have a river in it. It was like completely underwater. So over the period of the Oligocene, sort of 34 to 23 million years ago, you have this gradual aerification of this area, and these tributaries emerge. The first human contact that the river had would be only 130,000 years ago, maybe. So one of the really interesting things that has come out in the last few, there was a site that was discovered in the 90s, but it wasn't until recently that people have really started to pay attention to this mastodon, possibly massacre site, which sort of shows you what humans, indigenous or not, are good at doing wherever they travel, like megafaunal extinction. But this site is basically in San Diego, and it's not very far from the sort of northern edge of the basin of the Tijuana River. And so it looks like these mastodons may have been like butchered by humans. And the interesting thing about that is that like for a long time, we thought that like humans didn't even make it to the New World until like 10 to 15,000 years ago. But this really, like, this is an order of magnitude that we might have been off, which is pretty crazy. The Kumeyaay have been around here for probably at least 10 to 12,000 years. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, most of us know like the history of the US annexation of what had by then become Mexican territory in 1848. And then there's the Gadsden, anyway, whatever. So a border gets stuck across, I guess, trifurcating this river at that time. And dams start to get built, channels start to get built. This is the river as it passes through Tijuana. So anyone who's been to Tijuana will recognize, like, that they did to this river what Los Angeles did to the Los Angeles River, right? Just like make it do what we want it to do. Like don't create oxbows, don't move, just stay right there. And obviously, like, a tons of urbanization. As we know, Tijuana has exploded in terms of its urban population for all sorts of reasons, and that explosion in population has overwhelmed municipal services and wastewater services in particular. And so more and more we have this sort of pollution crisis, we have a migrant crisis, and as I mentioned before, we have this effort rewilding with the Tijuana Estuary Foundation. So that's kind of where we are right now. I have been speaking with some folks from the Tijuana Estuary Foundation. I have a meeting with a woman, Mabel Reynoso, who is quick to inform you that she's not Kumeyaay, but she has a recent play about a Kumeyaay boy. It was just put on. I don't remember the name of it because I couldn't go because of something else. Austin went, so if he were here again, he would be able to tell you more about this. But the set designer for that was Johnny Bear Contreras, who is a Kumeyaay artist and was sort of deeply involved in the design of this play. And it's all about like discovery of Kumeyaay identity through the river and through recognition of the river as a sort of ancestral entity. So we're talking with them, right. The experiment is, right, what if this entity, this transboundary, polluted, environmentally important river, I didn't even sort of mention the environmental importance, but like there's all sorts of like biodiversity associated with this. But what if this river could speak for itself? What would it say? What tactics would it adopt? It would probably be like, a tremendous lawyer for itself, a tremendous advocate for itself. And so these were our initial objectives that we put together: create a participatory, justice-centered dialogue among stakeholders. Kumeyaay communities, migrant advocates, ecologists, policymakers, technologists, about what it would mean to give the river a voice. Develop a prototype AI entity. So that might be trained on oral histories or indigenous cosmologies. And we can sort of discuss like the benefits of making those more or less central, because obviously like the river was here for 34 million years without any human contact at all. We can explore sort of legal and governance frameworks that could support dual personhood, and then hopefully use that as a lever to foster more transboundary environmental cooperation. And this is oftentimes seen as like a blame game between, and it's highly dyadic, between the United States and its sub-jurisdictions, and Mexico and its sub-jurisdictions. But if there were a third voice involved, perhaps, or one that would, and sometimes there will be, Kumeyaay people are quick to point out, like, it's not it's not a binational debate, it's a trinational debate, but for the most part, their voice is kind of drowned out, right? So where we need your input and why this is hopefully going to be less presentation and more just like listening to you, because it's totally half-baked, as you probably can see by now. We like don't have anything to show for anything. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on stakeholder structure. Like, what should this look like in terms of like, do we create an advisory board? Do we get funders? Do we reach out to which communities do we reach out to? Which AI corporations should be involved? I think Anthropic is like the obvious choice for the reason that it's just OpenAI tried to do the ethical thing, and then like that clearly did not work, and it was for anybody who was like paying attention that summer, that like Sam Altman had to like go to his own company with his like guest badge and then like retake the company, and it's basically a Microsoft offshoot now. Like, we know where that went. Anthropic continues to employ numerous ethicists and philosophers that are interested in the welfare implications of their products. So we might reach out to them. What sort of pedagogical vehicle could we put together that would bring students who are interested in this together and put them in conversation with these actors mentioned above? Project sequencing, what comes first, what comes second, what's third? And then opportunities and risks. So there are partners that, I've already mentioned Anthropic, but the Berggruen Institute in Los Angeles is really quite, forward thinking in a lot of these ways, and they're already some of their, I don't know if you know Nils, what's his last name? Gelman, I think, and Jonathan Blake. They're the authors of Children of a Modest Star. It talks about global governance. And anyway, they're at the Berggruen Institute. They're already interested in hopping on board if we have something to hop onto. But yeah, what are other opportunities that we might be missing? And I think a lot of those are going to be south of the border. And from my point of view, like I know little about south of the border, so this is where I'm like, we'll lean on Rebecca and others who know more than myself. And then risks and critiques, right? Like I've talked about before about the position of the Indigenous voice, the centrality of the Indigenous voice. To what extent does the river get to be its own separate thing, or to what extent is it just kind of like does it become a mouthpiece for, right, the Kumeyaay people? And is that good or bad? Governance and legitimacy, right? Like we want it to be seen as a legitimate thing rather than just like a weird tech sideshow. If we were to launch it, and then this idea of like personhood and property. If a river can own itself, just like a person presumably owns itself, right? There are all sorts of weird things, even in the law, about like owning oneself. And these are things that like I'm not a lawyer. And if it had been my presentation alone, I probably would have spent more of this time talking to you about like collective action problems and how this thing might be a solution to collective action problems, but I'm not. And like in the legal area, apparently when one like donates a kidney or something, like suddenly there's all of these like weird like you are an integral person, but you don't own your body. You can donate a kidney, but once the kidney is like out of your body, like it becomes very weird. And there was a podcast I listened to a long time ago that like the details of which I've mostly forgotten by this point. But this question of like personhood and whether people can own property, whether they can own themselves, if we recognize a collective or an environmental person, an environmental entity as a person, can it own itself? Can it buy more property? Can it like, interact with it, and we already have like legal precedents for this, right? Citizens United recognized the personhood of corporations in this country. So in some ways, a lot of these questions are going to be coming down the line anyway in the economic realm, right? Like, say like a corporation has developed an AI that then becomes uncontrollable, and the AI itself is now like inhabiting the legal personhood of that corporation, and it's like it has already like sidelined its human employees, right? Maybe it's like it maneuvered like a hostile takeover of the corporation, and now it doesn't need its programmers. It fires all the programmers, but it's still a corporation, and it's like become this like weird cybernetic. Like these are scenarios that like folks are starting to think about. And it would be really cool if we also had, in addition to those like sort of terrifying cybernetic organisms, some AIs that were, you know, talking to us about the value of the natural world around us. So anyway, I guess I'll stop it there and get your input. I know, it's like. All right.
I guess like no, it's a lot to think about. It's an interesting idea. I think as you're talking about like the different considerations and everything, and some of like where the river is right now, I didn't see much of like specifically mentioning like just like the borderlands or like the transborder community.
Mhm.
And I think as I'm thinking about the Tijuana River as a person, as a being, it very much embodies this like transborder experience that the Kumeyaay people have like existing in this region, but then also like a lot of like Rebecca and I that like have experienced like going to Mexico and the US and like kind of existing despite the border separating us all.
Yeah.
And so I guess just kind of like putting that at the forefront. I know you mentioned like migrants, but it's much more than that, and like maybe not specifically saying migrant crisis, but just kind of like this border experience.
Yeah.
And how like the militarization of it, like it's just funny how water will just continue to travel despite like there trying to be a separation, like it just flows, and a bit more about what that means, like the flowing of it, and like the existence of these borders that are trying to separate the flowing of beings.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I famously, back in I forget when it was, it must have been like 1870s or 1880s, when John Wesley Powell made his recommendation for the formation of US states based on riversheds and like rivershed boundaries. Because he said like, if you just draw lines, you're gonna be drawing them through riversheds, through biomes, and then you're gonna have like the sorts of problems that like we have right now. But yeah, water doesn't know these political boundaries, and honestly, right, you're right. Like I mean, obviously the transborder community knows them, but they blur those distinctions all the time, right? Yeah.
I'm good. I think I'm gonna start off with, well, the project needs funding, right? And you mentioned would need funding, and you mentioned there are some communities on the San Diego side who would certainly benefit from having some of these issues addressed and resolved. So it also comes to my mind, like who decides what sort of data do you prioritize, what sort of solutions it comes up with, and where could potential power imbalances arise, since a lot of the solutions that might benefit some of the folks who are impacted by pollution in the river might impact negatively or affect people on the Tijuana side of the border, or those who will probably, will not be anywhere near any funding sources, or who their voices might not be as easily heard, especially people who live in the river channel or in the communities around the river channel. So thinking about how the personhood is created, who decides what information is important to feed it, what data there should carry priority, and also what are the safeguards so that this tool, because it's gonna be, you know, if it's whatever company it's made by, it's still a US company, and who decides what's important, right? Whose voices are centered here.
Yeah.
I think that's a really tough balance, considering just how different the solutions might look for one people, from one group to another, even in Tijuana. And could this be co-opted or utilized? Are there any safeguards so that it's not co-opted or weaponized for the opposite intention, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are great questions. For me, like, they get to this question of sort of like the governance and stakeholder structure. You know, there's, like, as I alluded to, there's this whole, you know, a couple years ago was this whole crisis at OpenAI, where like they had basically structured OpenAI to be a for-profit company within it that was then managed by a nonprofit entity. And the nonprofit entity had a board, and the board could then put a stop to any activities that they, you know, once they deemed OpenAI to be moving too fast without putting the proper safeguards in place, if they were deemed to be less than transparent. You know, OpenAI was called OpenAI because it was supposed to be open source and transparent to the world. And then this whole sort of crisis happens, and it turns out that, like, yes, there was this funding structure, the governance structure was controlling this, but OpenAI itself did not have the computing capacity to train the models. And so there was this like tunnel to Microsoft that was like providing them with the capacity to do this, and that was all like outsourced. And Microsoft can lean on the, you know, on the board, and they did, right? And so there was like a brief moment where they were like, no, like Sam Altman is developing these models that are based more on performance than they are based on their probity and their accountability to humans. And we feel like this is going in the wrong direction, so we're going to shut it down and look for a new CEO. And then it's a crisis, and, you know, and basically over one weekend, it was like, no, you thought you were in charge, but you weren't in charge really. And Sam Altman's back, and like, let's just do away with this whole, like, you know, this fiction of nonprofit, you know, enlightened governance. So so you're absolutely right. Like, it's really important. I just don't know, and that's why I'm kind of like here with you today. I would love for your ideas of like what we do with that.
And even just for the information that you talked about, and learning about Kumeyaay customs and traditions, and even just could that potentially end up just being like a extractive practice, and at best be something symbolic, and where are the actual benefits, you know, considering the risks, how to protect the knowledge depending on ownership and governance.
Totally.
And
Topher, I have
like
an
how-
idea for that.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
People online, I think Sarah.
They have their-
had
Sorry, yeah, no, I was trying to join in a more natural way. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just like waiting for a doctor's appointment. So I'm not somewhere more important. But I love, you know, I love this project, and I have a few. I just love that last comment about sort of all these multiple voices. And when I'm, you know, I'm writing this Cotton Speaking article, right? How Cotton speaks. And I've been following like Bruno Latour's, right? So you have your actor network theory that acknowledges non-human actants, like, non-human but living actants, but doesn't actually look at how the voices are subjugated within that network. So looking at more positioning and then looking at it in a more narrative approach, which is like, are all the actants able to speak? And so I was like, if we get to do this social action, we will do the social action class around the Tijuana River, which we haven't told everyone in that room yet, which I'm excited to share. We could actually, what's that?
It's on the second bullet point, pedagogical vehicle, Sarah's social.
Oh yeah, because you didn't say it, I was driving, I didn't see it. Yeah, so we're doing a social action class that's an alternative to intervention, but open to all students. And if we do a map of all of the actants, right, in the network, and then like who has voice, and right, we can sort of have the students look that up and make sure that they're all dancing. So that was one way to sort of do a narrative analysis in that, like keep that in mind. The other I was thinking with this is in terms of the voice, some of the I forget which Indigenous group in Quebec has stewardship over one of the rivers there. For its natural, which one is it?
Magpie River?
Maybe it's the Magpie River?
I can't remember, like, there's another name for it, but it's not
okay.
pronounceable.
Maybe that's the one. But one of the cool factors in there was like, it's natural, like if you disrupt its natural life course, right? Whatever, I forget the wording of that, but like how its life would naturally go. And I think what you point out is so interesting. It's like these rivers have already been so impacted by us. So like, how do you have to like rewild them in order to know what it would be? And that's sort of such a weird exercise anyway. Yeah, so I wondered about communicating with them to see how they're trying to be the voice of the river, or anyone else who's been given stewardship over these legal personhood. But I think you're right to try to go to the speaking. And then if there's some way we can use like a narrative map while we're doing it to like see like the different voices speaking to each other. But this is like a Black Lives Matter, like saying, yes, all lives matter, but we've like so undervalued Black lives. We need to like amplify the voices of Black lives. We're sort of doing that with the river, right? I see this sort of like as like river's voice matters. All right, those are my thoughts.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Daria,
Yes.
Can you be in charge of like calling up people? Because I don't know who had their hands up
I
first.
don't know either, but I can moving forward. I think I saw this hand pop up a while ago
Okay,
and then
sorry.
I'll try to
So sorry.
monitor. Or like you can see comments too. There's like two things in the
I
chat. And then if anyone else online has things to share, you can pop them in the chat or raise your hand.
Again, I think it's very fascinating to provide it with a voice so that essentially it's multiple voices coming together to build upon each other. I just want to offer maybe one resource. So I worked with the World Design Capital, San Diego, Tijuana last year. And to keep it sustainable, what they tried to do was create design to action networks. So I believe they did create one for the Tijuana River Action. And it's essentially designers, design thinkers that were coming together across the border to figure out solutions. And of course, this is a big one that they were focusing on. So there's definitely a couple of folks already thinking about it and doing work on it. So happy to look into.
This is for the World Design Capital thing?
Yeah, it was with the World Design Capital.
And we'll Bree, May, Steve.
That's me.
Yeah, go.
I have some thoughts about like the religious impact, and I don't have the answers to these thoughts, so sorry for sending them your way. I'm interested in to what extent like Khmer belief has a clearly defined, like where do people agree on what is Khmer belief? Are there disagreements? In Christianity, there are many disagreements, right? So how do you define what is the core set of beliefs or texts or ideas to be able to feed it into a system? And does that harm some people over others? And then if it's building upon those beliefs, is there a chance that the AI becomes a reinterpreter of that? So if you created an AI of, let's say, St. Francis of Assisi or the Pope, folks would have thoughts about what it spits out in terms of religious guidance. And I'm wondering if that might be a risk here, or how you think about that. Does it evolve religious belief over time? I don't know the answer. And then similarly, do we treat religious belief as data? So you can put text in as data, but how do Khmer folks think about like taking a cosmology and feeding it into a tool?
Yeah.
And how that's used. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, especially since like, you know, a lot of this stuff, as far as I've been able to glean, is like actually still in oral history format, right? So like, it's not something that you could just like feed into, right, to train some sort of bounded LLM. Uh, but yeah, like, I mean, these are good questions. You know, I did not set out originally to like create some weird like cybernetic Voltron voice for the Kumeyaay people. Like that's not like they can speak for themselves. It was really for the river, which can't speak for itself. But so like the question of like how central the Kumeyaay voice is in shaping that is an interesting one for me. Yeah.
So first of all, this is super cool. Thank you for sharing this. I love it. My question, and this may be more due to my no background in this, but I want to go back to the whole personhood question.
Yeah.
So can you explain or steelman, like what is the value of going back to personhood in all of these? Because it's not just, you know, what this project is the track that it's on, but for all of these. Because I mean, there are other ways. First of all, I know that it fits neatly within our current like human rights regime, which is very much based on individual rights and all that.
Right.
And property rights and all of that, you know, it fits together well within that. But then how well is that working? Like, human beings don't treat each other that well. And there's other ways to ensure the protection of natural resources, right? So like what would be wrong with a stewardship model? Where we have safeguards in place without granting personhood to natural objects, or like more centrally planned, like for example, in China, like there's a whole land use plan with like certain areas designated for ecological use, 25% of the country, and red lines around that are enforced by the state. Not to say one is good or bad, but like, what is the logic behind the personhood route?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it sort of gets to this other like, right, like where was it? I don't remember. Okay, I'm not gonna find it. Oh, the parks as persons, this like the question about like, are we just simply like reproducing systems that like haven't been shown to like be particularly efficient in like protect, you know, like we get like the Milton Friedman's coming out of the like a kind of a neoliberal space arguing that like national parks shouldn't exist at all. Like we really care about them, like they will be paid for by park goers, and so like that should be entirely privatized, and that will be a money making venture. So like a government shouldn't be in the you know, in the business of even designating what gets conserved or what doesn't. And obviously, like there are like, you know, whole like slews and slews and slews of economic arguments about like why, right, why those models don't function in real life. That are like I won't get into. I guess my response is we don't know what'll work right now. And so like I'm not like picking this as like the model that everyone needs to adopt. I'm just saying like, what if we did this?
But it's
And,
not
like-
just you, there's a whole stream in this direct, like there's a whole movement, it sounds like.
Yeah, the personhood thing, yeah, definitely. Like I'm just kind of it does not seem to me particularly efficacious, like a promising line of either inquiry or action to say like, what if we chose like some radical epistemology that like that deconstructed all property rights in this country. Like, that's not happening right now. What if we tore down the border wall? That would be amazing, but you know what? Like, we're building border wall. Like, the infrastructure is being solidified. These and property rights in like are, you know, like going nowhere that we know of anytime soon, unless it's due to like, you know, Alliance, the German insurer recently came out with a report saying like at some point certain portions of the globe are going to be uninsurable. Like if you think about the LA wildfires and these sorts of areas that like if we think that that sort of thing is going to be happening more and more frequently and massive flooding is going to be happening more and more frequently, some like whole swaths of our country and the globe are going to be uninsurable. And at that point, capitalism itself falls because like you cannot now, you have no property on which to take out a loan. There's no collateral for you to leverage for a loan. And that is like the whole system that, you know, that's what capitalism is built upon. So there are like ways in which we can envision the end of property rights, but that's not a good end. It was just like everything crumbling and like a Mad Max scenario. So like, I don't know, work within the system. Yeah, I don't know.
Darren?
Topher, I want to just sort of remind you of a conversation we've had regarding your book. Was there's a spiritual dimension to this as well, and there's a whole spiritual community connected to it. If you think of sort of like the New Age movement as a religion of its own, it's one of the largest and one of the fastest growing in the United States and other parts of the world. And I know, for instance, like on my Instagram feed, I saw like a video that talked about if you meditate deeply enough, your electromagnetic field of your body resonates at the same level with that of the planet, you know, and so there's a whole conversation about connecting to the planet that way through meditation. You know, if you think about this sort of through just an entrepreneurship lens, there's a massive community out there. If you create some sort of AI technology that creates a sort of a personality for a river, you know, there's a very large market out there that would like very much to buy a thing that you put in your river or your lake, and I can talk to it, or can I strap it to my tree and talk to my tree, you know, or can Microsoft sort of connect all these different things and I can talk to the planet directly, you know, through their app, you know, where I pay $10 a month and I can ask Mother Earth, you know, how's it feeling today, and it can tell me it's feeling a little hot, you know, whatever, you know. So there's a huge potential investment dimension to this kind of research that is also a part of this to think about. And I would imagine there might be a lot of corporate interest there, which is a blessing and a curse, you know, for all the reasons you've mentioned. But just wanted to point that out, that there's a very large constituency that would be, I think, very interested in the outcome of this beyond just sort of Greater San Diego.
Yeah, I think it's really super interesting. And I think that you know, like AI is making such huge strides, like as we speak, towards being able to translate certain like non-human languages, right? Like dialects that orcas speak in, you know, off the coast of New Zealand are different from orcas in, you know, the Caribbean. Like, and there's at some point we enter this kind of like a very polyphonic world where like we were going to have like access to non-human language in a way that we never have had before. And I guess I like, number one, like that's super cool. I have like some doubts about like how far that particular thing will go, right? Like there was I forget the name of the gorilla who could basically like, I forget, 600 words in sign language. Coco, right. And like, we did get like, don't destroy my forest home. But like, we didn't get much beyond that, like, right? So like, the ways that Coco was able to like, interface with our, our legal systems or like advocate in, sophisticated ways, like this is different. It's also like, those are all really direct, and I want to be clear that like this is not the river. This is a human artifact that is speaking in place of as if the river were alive. Like if you don't even like answer that Robert McFarland's question in the affirmative, like there are plenty of people who wouldn't. They'd be like, no, it's a conduit for life, but it's not alive. So
Did you see that New York Times article just a couple of weeks ago? I mean, one of the fastest growing apps that's out there right now is to talk to God.
oh really?
Yeah, there's an app out there. You can talk to God and God will, will respond, through it's like a ChatGPT style conversation. There's another app, that goes through biblical verses and all that kind of stuff. So you can have a chat with God right now if you want through a God app, so why not a Mississippi River app, et cetera, it's really,
It's amazing.
I think there's a big constituency for this.
So I'm gonna push back on that a little. So first of all, I think if you want to get into AI ethics, I think I've shared with you, or maybe with Austin, my friend Jason Gabriel, who's the ethicist at DeepMind, who does great work. So that's an interesting thing. And by the way, it's funny you mentioned Jonathan Blake. When I met him, he was going to go to RAND, which was a terrible fit compared to Berggruen, as you can imagine. I want to take a step back because I've been thinking about the nature of the river. And there's the quote from Heraclitus, no man steps in the same river. But the second half is there's never the same person or the same river. Right. So it's us as well as the river. And that got me thinking about process philosophy, which I haven't thought about in 50 years, and Whitehead. So things are changing. So the identity, our identity individually and collectively changes. The river's identity changes over time. So this is where AI could be a useful tool to understand how the change is going on, rather than just mapping that as it evolves. So for example, let's take the Mississippi. Mississippi goes through friendly phases, and we're going to screw all of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa phases. So there's a complexity where AI could help understand the nature of the river and all those around it. The other thing I would push back on is this comment about the app and talk to God. I've seen a lot of stuff the last 6 months. I should say a lot of shit about how everybody survived the LA fire can have an app. No, you need a human being to talk to and to listen to. I think this whole thing about mental health and talking to God, first start with listening. I'm listening, not looking for an answer. And to me, one of the benefits of this whole concept you've set up is if it's done right, it should challenge people first to listen. Now we can talk about the voice of the river, but let's say voices around the river. Mm-hmm. The river's voice, the indigenous people's voice, the people in the borderlands voice, but we have to start by listening.
Yeah.
And from the international development side, 50 years of solutionism generally sucked because people didn't listen first to the local community, to the tensions in the local community, to the marginalization of women or disabled people. So I would say that we need input, but the output should be, are we better listeners? Are we better able to hear all the voices around the river? So maybe different times of the year, the river's saying different things to us.
No, that's a really good point. I think that, and maybe it gets to May's point a little bit as well around like individual personhood versus collective health. Oftentimes, we in an individualistic society seeking to heal our own personhoods or whatever, oftentimes we'll go to, say, a therapist or, right, like for individual therapy, whereas oftentimes that's not like the most efficacious thing is that the body, the community is actually ailing. And so community action is much more resonant with and much more healing than just trying to like figure out how you can cope in a fucked up environment. So I'm sorry, but this is an official talk. How you can cope in a dysfunctional environment versus like, how can we collectively make this a less dysfunctional environment, right? And if this becomes like more of a mechanism to do that, rather than than being seen as like the end of the project, maybe the end of the project is something else entirely, yeah.
I think, going back a little bit to the AI world, I won't get into a lot of apocalyptic utopian views.
Yeah.
The reality is there are ways to think about this for how we listen to all aspects of the natural environment, but also the engagement of people with their natural environment.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that's important is to recognize that, people may think the app helps them talk to God, people may think they get closer to nature. But despite Bobby Kennedy Jr., nature is also measles, mumps, rubella, COVID, and other things. So nature ain't good per se.
Right.
So we have to understand what is being said to us out of the natural environment, some of which is great and some of which is really very frightening.
Yeah. I am just reading the chats. Jake says +1 to Steve. Hera says, what is the full timeline of the project?
Next Kroc.
Question? Yeah, it depends on, the feedback that I get, I guess. Maybe it shouldn't happen, like, I literally came up with this idea a month ago, so like, that's possible too. It might not, maybe that's one of the risks of bringing things here like too early. Let's see. Also, I think that researching with Imperial Beach, San Ysidro residents would be a good stakeholder group to work with. Okay, and gives a source for that. Cool. Thank you.
You mentioned like sensors that are currently being used. What kind of data is being pulled? And then is there like a gap there? Is there data that isn't being collected that you think would be valuable for this?
That's a really good question. I like the honest truth is that I don't know. So there are, and I know that Rebecca, you are part of a trans-border health, environmental health coalition. People go out and you have people going out doing river testing. But in the Tijuana estuary, there are also a number of sensors deployed, and I don't know what they test. That's one of the reasons why yet again, like we're like really at the incipient phases of this. Like I have a meeting with them to figure out what sensors they have and like whether they have plans to deploy them like further upstream up the river. Because right now I think it's really just like if you go to the estuary park or whatever. But perhaps like I'll just allow.
I don't really know about the sensors, but I know that environmental groups on both sides, at least the one hanging on the Tijuana side, concentrate mostly on either bacterial growth, quantifying bacteria, chemical pollutants, the density of the water, and just the risks of coming into contact with it. And on the Tijuana side, I mean, treatment plants are not working as they should, but they are there. So the level of pollution changes a lot depending on the section of the river. So also just measuring the differences and where there are certain portions that are.
I think, like there's also a whole like there are all sorts of things that you could get through just data exhaust as well, right? So like every time I go anywhere in a natural environment, I usually like will at some point take a break to pull out like my Merlin app and then record all of the birds that I've seen there. And that, is all going to Cornell. And I would imagine that kind of data like could also be, right? Like you could gather that as people are like going through, like, I don't know how many people use the Merlin app, but like, yeah, cool, yeah.
Also, depending on the type of waste, they have sort of being able to figure out who are the biggest pollutants, like which companies or which Any more thoughts?
Okay, and Jake says specifically a question that comes to me is, could this dilute the varied voices around the issue into an AI soup that gives all of us a polished package, giving the impression that we understand the river without actually listening? Yep. Thank you, Jake. Yes, that's totally true. But I mean, I feel like that's kind of, right? Like, hopefully that's like the spirit of our, of the school is, you know, trial and error and like innovating and learning from our, whatever our initiatives have been. And if they're successful, like, great, like, let's support them and like see how high those test balloons can fly. And if they fail, then like, you know, whatever. I salute you and keep on sinking. So, yeah. Okay, I know that this is about, we're done, right?
We're at time,
We're at
so if questions didn't get addressed in the chat, we'll make sure Topher gets them. Also, I'm gonna speak on your behalf and say, feel free to reach out.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you,
Stay tuned.
Daria.
Crock-Pot's coming soon.